Deadly clashes erupted outside Damascus, igniting a volatile mix of sectarian tension and regional power plays. Syrian forces confront the Druze community amid escalating violence, compounded by Israeli airstrikes justified falsely as preemptive defense for the Druze. As protests spread to the Galilee, civilians bear the brunt of this spiraling crisis, with global powers watching closely. Fears mount that localized conflict could engulf the region, testing alliances and demanding urgent diplomatic intervention. Welcome to In Depth. The Guardian has reported that escalating violence near Damascus has killed at least 16 as clashes erupted in Druze majority areas following a fake audio clip inciting sectarian tension. Israeli strikes targeted groups allegedly threatening the Druze, complicating the fragile situation. The press added roads were blockaded amid gunfire, hiding local grievances and external interventions. The conflict deepens tensions between Syria's government and the Druze. Stalled negotiations and massacres in Latakia have heightened fears among minorities. Suwaida's Druze accused authorities of abandoning besieged towns. The Guardian also highlighted that Syria's administration struggles to disarm armed groups and restore stability, with sporadic violence persisting despite temporary ceasefire. Israel risks exacerbating the crisis, testing domestic cohesion and global diplomacy. And according to Ahram Online, deadly sectarian clashes and Israeli strikes have thrown Syria into chaos, prompting UN Special Envoy Geir Pedersen to denounce the violence as unacceptable. Tensions flare around Damascus and Homs after Israel targeted groups allegedly threatening the Druze, further destabilizing the fragile nation. Pedersen urged immediate action to protect civilians, restore calm, and prevent communal tensions from escalating. The newspaper added that the crisis exposes deepening divisions between Syrians, Druze minority and government-linked forces challenging the new leadership post-Assad. Israel's intervention, though framed as defensive, complicated the situation and risks regional escalation amid global concern. Pedersen demanded an end to Israeli strikes, warning of dire consequences without urgent diplomacy to shield vulnerable populations and avert further bloodshed. Once again, the shadows of war stretch across Syria as fresh violence near Damascus threatens to unravel fragile stability and pull regional rivals into the flames.
In a region already scarred by over a decade of war, violence has flared once again outside Damascus, threatening to ignite new fault lines across the Middle East. It began with violent clashes between Syrian security forces and armed groups in Daraa-Damascus corridor, an area long known for its strategic importance and fragile stability. The fighting erupted after an alleged ambush targeting government checkpoints. Syria responded swiftly, launching a military operation that quickly spiraled into urban warfare. The violence did not remain local for long. On April 30th, Israel conducted what it described as a warning strike against forces preparing attacks near the Golan Heights. The airstrikes targeted positions south of Damascus, further inflaming tensions along the volatile border. As the conflict escalated, protests erupted beyond Syria's control. In Galilee region, roadblocks appeared overnight. Demonstrators, many from the Druze community, demanded accountability and action over the bloodshed just across the border. Behind the scenes, regional alliances are shifting. Syria condemned the Israeli strikes, calling them a violation of sovereignty. Meanwhile, Lebanon's religious leaders issued warnings of growing sectarian unrest. With regional powers watching closely, the risk of wider entanglement grows. Civilians bear the brunt, families displaced yet again, caught between renewed offensives, cross-border raids, and proxy rivalries. Aid organizations warn of worsening humanitarian conditions. Internationally, the United Nations called for restraint, but diplomatic solutions remain elusive. As Damascus consolidates control, the potential for miscalculation or deliberate escalation looms large. This is not just another flare-up in Syria. This is a warning sign, one that echoes across borders, alliances, and battlefields. What happens next will shape not only Syria's future, but the entire region's balance of power.
Well, providing more analysis about the most recent updates concerning the critical situation in Syria, we're joined from Cairo by Dr. Amani Suleiman, Director of the Mediterranean Studies Institute at Alexandria University, and Dr. Khaled Dawood, Al Ahram Weekly Managing Editor. Good afternoon to you both, and let me here start with Dr. Suleiman. And what role does the Daraa-Damascus corridor play in reigniting tensions amid this latest Syrian crisis?
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. The Daraa-Damascus corridor is very strategic, and it really connects the Syrian capital to the Jordanian border. Throughout almost 14 years of civil war, it was always this tension and this rivalry between the regime forces, the ex-regime forces, and the other factions trying to control this corridor for its strategic location, where it leads to, as I said, Jordanian cross-border, and then also, the villages along this road are very complicated. Some of them are 100% Sunni, almost 100% as in Daraa. Some of them are with Druze, and they have many of the Syrian Mosaic population. Hence, trying to cut this corridor by anyone but the interim government really puts this government in a very critical position, not just as a matter of civil tension or matter of in control of its own lands, but also with its relationship to neighboring countries, especially Jordan. We have to remember that Jordan was one of the countries that was a little bit sensitive about the new interim government in Syria with its background, Islamic background, and connections to Islamic Jihad. So it's not just this time, as we have heard in the introduction, this time it's not just about civil tension in Syria. The neighboring countries and the neighboring forces are looking in worsen to what's going on the ground.
Right. Mr. Dawood, why has Israel framed its intervention as protecting Syria's Druze? And how credible is this claim politically?
Well, thanks, Mona, for having me. Of course, since the downfall of the former Syrian regime, Israel has been given relatively a free hand in bombing Syria on a constant basis. And of course, we cannot forget the statements that were made by the Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich recently, in which he said that Israel will continue working on dismantling Syria. It's been a constant Israeli policy in the region in general to encourage divisions, particularly in the countries that are neighboring Israel and its borders, in order to make sure that there won't be any threat to the Israeli security. And from that perspective, they used the issue of the Druze community, considering that there are also Druze on the Israeli side of the border, and they have been closely linked to the Israeli government. So they have taken this as an excuse to interfere inside Syria, and claiming that Israel would be the party to protect the Druze community within Syria, while of course that doesn't really apply to the majority of the Druze community within Syria itself, who consider themselves to be Syrians. But the problem falls on the current Syrian government that maybe has managed to make some external successes. Now we can see the Syrian foreign minister attending Security Council meetings in New York, foreign dignitaries visiting Syria. But internally, unfortunately, the new Syrian regime has not been successful so far in restoring a real state with a real army. As you know, Mona, the current government is basically a collection of militias that have been fighting the former Syrian regime for over 14 years. I don't think they have yet the capability to control the internal situation, besides the background of the current leader of the regime, Mr. Ahmad al-Shara, who's known to have been a member of Al-Qaeda and a member of Daesh, and is surrounded by many extremists who do not necessarily believe in maintaining the integrity of the Syrian state and the coexistence of the different communities that are there. So as long as there isn't internal effects in keeping the country together and satisfying the various communities, whether Druze or Shiites or Christians, I think we will continue to see these flare-ups that happen within Syria, pushing further the need to restore a serious army, a serious police force, so that can practice the role of the state in maintaining the unity of the country and the coexistence of its diverse communities that have been there for ages.
Indeed, Mr. Khaled. However, the response of the government, as you said respectively, is still vague. How will it respond towards the calls of the Druze and at the same time the interference of Israel? We'll get back to you, Dr. Suleiman. Could Israel's warning strikes near Damascus escalate into a broader regional conflict involving non-state actors?
Listening to the Druze reactions yesterday, the problem is now we see fragmentation within the fragmentation. Like inside the sect of the Syrian Druze themselves, we have listened to voices of the sheikhs and leaders who said that we don't want Israel to interfere, we do want accountability, and we want those who elect us to be prosecuted. However, some other Druze voices, like the Hagari, asked for international protection. And I'm afraid that, yeah, perhaps Israel will take advantage of this situation, and perhaps are some of the Syrian Druze who maybe want vengeance or want to, as they say, protect themselves. Also, Israel is controlling Golan, and Golan has thousands of Syrian Druze. So, yeah, maybe non-state actors would be armed and would be used on the ground with the Israeli Air Force to do more of like a buffer zone or a borderline where the Druze are working for, or some of the Druze of Syria working for the security of Israel. This is a big fear, and with the vulnerability of the current Syrian regime, it could be achieved, unfortunately.
Indeed, Dr. Suleiman, but Israel is the only outside actor playing. Dr. Dawood, with protests erupting in Jalili, what message are regional minorities sending to their own governments and global powers?
Well, I mean, before that, I just want to follow up on what you just said correctly, that Israel is not the only country outside power that has an influence in Syria. And probably, I mean, Turkey also has a very strong influence in all the developments that have been happening in Syria since the ouster of the former Bashar Assad regime. And I'm sure you've read the reports about meetings that have been held between the Turkish and the Israeli side, perhaps to avoid the scenario that you referred to about the possibility of non-state actors, although there are many of them who might get involved in some sort of a clash with the Israeli side. But let's consider that, of course, that since the new Syrian regime came in and President Ahmad al-Shara, they have been trying to send calming messages to Israel, making sure that through the Americans, that the Israelis know that they have no aggressive intentions toward them. And we've even read some reports about the readiness on the Syrian side, the new government, to normalize relations with the Israelis. But however, the Israelis remain critical and suspicious towards the new regime in Syria, considering its background and considering also the existence of many foreign fighters on Syrian soil who have been helping the rebellion against the previous regime. And unfortunately, the new Syrian government has not taken serious steps to exclude those foreign elements that have been causing worries for several regional countries. On the contrary, we've seen the new government actually giving nationality, Syrian nationality, to those foreign fighters and even giving them military ranks. So, I mean, the new Syrian government led by Shara, they need to put their acts together and to take a consistent policy on what exactly they want. They want a state that respects all its citizens and diversity of the communities that exist in Syria, or they want to impose their own strict ideology that they have been known for, since arms against the former Syrian regime. But of course, there are many actors that are in play: Turkey, Israel, the United States, and of course the communities that exist in Lebanon and have an extension in Syria. So the situation is very complicated, and again, the main challenge lies in the hands of the current Syrian regime in following up on their pledges. It's not enough just to say that they will respect the diversity of the Syrian community, but they have to restrain the extremist elements who have been mainly behind those sectarian clashes, as we have seen recently against the Druze. Just a rumor that there is a tape by one of the Druze figures there criticizing the Prophet Muhammad was enough for the flow of several members close to the regime trying to attack that village, and which expanded later in those clashes that we've seen. So the Syrian government needs to show more seriousness in controlling and restraining those foreign elements and fighters, while considering that this is a very serious challenge, because at the end of the day, it's very different to lead a rebellion than to run a big country such as Syria with all many problems that they've been having over the past 40 years.
Right, Dr. Sulaim, and Mr. Dawood here brought up the issue of Lebanon. So how might Lebanon's sectarian dynamics influence or mirror the unrest spreading across Syria's borders?
The Lebanese Druze are the most politically organized group of all Druze in the Arab countries. We have heard Walid Jumblat offering to be a mediator between the Syrian government and the Syrian Druze. And at the same time, other Druze leaders in Lebanon asked for self-control and asked for the Syrian government to take action to protect its civilians. However, to see that the Lebanese Druze are very worried from what's happening in Syria tells you that they feel threatened. They feel that maybe other perhaps Sunni factions in Lebanon starts to put the Druze community in Lebanon in not ease just because of what their Syrian relatives, if we may say, would do. The problem is Israel is talking about the Druze all being one faction, whether in Israel, in Lebanon, or in Syria, talking about interfering to protect them, putting the Druze in a way where they look like traitors or maybe affiliates with Israel. With all the sectarian tension taking place, whether in Syria or in Lebanon, the problem now is that other factions, especially with claims like insult the Prophet and so on, this kind of civil unrest would move from Syria to Lebanon and cause tension between,
or vice versa.
Yes, and also cause the same tension or perhaps violence in Lebanon as well.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dawood, can world bodies and international organizations, for instance, the UN, can it or does it have the ability to de-escalate tensions without addressing underlying sectarian grievances?
Well, Mona, you know that the United Nations as an organization, they have several programs for countries that are going through post-conflict kind of tensions. But again, it all depends on the will of the countries that actually are members of the United Nations and namely members of the Security Council. I mean, the United Nations would not act on its own, especially that the problems in Syria are not only related, as you know, to the issue of the Druze community or the Christian community. We also have a major problem with the Kurdish fighters that are continue to be the main military force that can challenge the new Syrian government. And as you know, we've been, again, despite the fact that the two sides, the Kurds and the Syrian government in Damascus, have signed an agreement to integrate the Kurdish forces within the Syrian army, the practices on the ground have been totally different. And we've been hearing recently calls for a federal sort of government whereby like something similar to the Iraqi situation where the Kurds in the north, they have their own independent government while being at the same time part of the overall Iraqi state. But unfortunately, again, after 14 years of war and infighting among the different factions, I think this is going to take some time until it settles down and the Syrian government is going to be able to access control all over its territory. But so far, the real threat to Syria, in my opinion, is the possibility of dividing the country into several parts, each one following its own government or its own priorities, whether the Kurds in the north or the Druze in the south. And then again, of course, we have also the Syrian community that's very influential and strong, and which can also require some sort of protection from outside forces. So the situation is very complicated, and there's a lot of hard work that's required on behalf of the Syrian government, as well as assistance by the international community, by regional countries that might be able to help Syria. And then, of course, the United Nations can get into help with their own programs and their own experience in that field. That would be most welcome. But what counts, after all, are the practices of the regime on the ground, the implementation of a serious constitution, whether we're going to have some sort of an election for a new parliament and election for the president. These are all missing parts of the puzzle that will determine the future of Syria. But in the short term, unfortunately, I think it will remain to be a state of tension, especially with the interference of the Israeli side, who have no interest in seeing stability in Syria. We've seen them expanding the parts of the Golan Heights that they have occupied. They have even went as far as saying they will never pull out from Jabal al-Sheikh or the Sheikh Mountain that they have been controlling, overlooking the border between Syria and Jordan, and overlooking the entire landscape of the capital, Damascus. So again, we should not expect stability in Syria as long as Israel continues to see to kind of try to divide the Syrian community and claim to champion the protection of the Druze community.
Dr. Suleiman, what do you have towards the false claim of Israel of preemptive defense to the Druze? And what do you think those claims would, or how would they reflect on Syria's international reconciliation efforts?
Well, I join Mr. Khaled Dawood in what he said. The ball now is in the court of the Syrian government. If they could control the foreign fighters and if they could control the extremists and put an end to all the clashes happening to all the minorities and all the communities in Syria, Israel will convince the world that it's doing what is good to protect the minorities in Syria. The claims that Israel is saying are really finding listening ears in the West because of how the government now, even if it's trying to be a unity government, is not really taking serious measures to stop the extremists who are still in the euphoria of victory over the ex-regime. They just take advantage of other Syrian communities and try to revenge some of them or put others under pressure. The government is not really taking serious measures to stop them. This is what Israel is building all its claims upon, We are protecting a minority, and this minority has relations with another minority in Israel. What we are doing is protection for both communities across the borders. And this kind of claim will always find the listening ear in the West.
Right, that was Dr. Amani Sulaiman, Director of the Mediterranean Studies Institute, Alexandria University, and Mr. Khaled Dawood, Al-Ahram Weekly Managing Editor. We thank you both for the very special insights here. And from Damascus to Galilee, sectarian tensions and geopolitical games risk unraveling Syria's fragile stability. That concludes this episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more coming up on Qnews.